And let's take you, to Dr. Fikile Vilakazi, who is a political analyst. Dr. Vilakazi, thank you so much for your time this evening. Just, news just in right now. Thami Ntuli, elected as the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal. Given the dynamics and the events that were at play leading up to this particular moment, does it surprise you?
Good evening to both of you in the studio and to viewers at home. It is it's not surprising given the dynamics that have been happening, lately. It's disappointing to an extent that it could have, KwaZulu-Natal is a very unique jurisdiction. It could have been a government that is led by Inkatha Freedom Party and Umkhonto weSizwe. But the glitches, that we have obviously seen within Umkhonto weSizwe, being a new political party, just things like not turning up for meetings at a critical hour, has compromised that possibility. So what that has done is that it has literally handed over the province to the hands of the provincial government of unity, which is what now, is the buzzing word. And what that means is then that an opportunity, a window of opportunity that had opened up to reorganize the province for major political parties in that province, like Inkatha Freedom Party and MK, has probably fallen off. Maybe it's not too late, but it's a big opportunity that is lost. And what it has done also, it has given the Democratic Alliance, for instance, which has been in opposition for so many years in the province, to literally remobilize itself and reorganize itself with the support of the ANC. And of course, then it brings back the ANC into territories that were previously lost, through by-elections and through successive, of course, regain of those territories by the IFP. So it's a very delicate mix of disappointment, at the same time also lost opportunity. In terms of moving the province to a place that I would imagine Prince Bangosuthelezi and others were working towards in the last 30 years, and that's just my reading of the politics of the province. How that turns out on the ground is also something that is worrying. With the Premier coming from IFP, but the IFP sitting on what I would imagine KZN would see as the wrong side of the fence. What does that do to the people on the ground? Bongiwe and viewers at home, in that we know that the people power in KwaZulu-Natal is skewed towards a particular direction. I think we've seen that just in the body politic of Ubaba Msholozi, once he was in the ANC, now as the president of Umkhonto weSizwe. And if you walk around KwaZulu-Natal in the districts, just on the streets, you feel that vibe, right? People are really happy. And then it's about where Ntuli, the Premier that is coming out, the Honorable, will be able to maintain that political power of the people and reconsolidate the people in favor of Inkatha Freedom Party, because that is what now the people will have to do. They will have to reread the political atmosphere to an extent that they can understand why it's important to be led by Inkatha Freedom Party and not the MK. And those questions are already on the ground. I have been listening and looking as well. People are asking, even as the parliament, the legislature was going on during the day, people were saying how, basically saying what is happening, because now we voted to Umkhonto weSizwe, and now what is happening? Why is it that Umkhonto weSizwe is disappearing? And those questions
but also, are not pardon me, Doctor, for interjecting there, just in the interest of time, but also in as much as there are questions around Umkhonto weSizwe, naturally, but this is a significant moment for the African National Congress, because there's now going to be an IFP Premier. The IFP ceded power to the African National Congress back in 2004 in the general elections. And now the ANC, in quite a significant period of time that has lapsed, will no longer have a premier. There were those that hoped that Siboniso Duma would be a premier, but those hopes have been dashed. It hasn't happened. What do you make of just the survival of the African National Congress in a politically complex province such as KwaZulu-Natal?
It's a complete demise, in my view. I think just these are the last kicks of a dying ANC in the province. That is clear. I mean, people are losing jobs. Major politicians have to go back to the ranks of poverty. It is a sad reality. We are not necessarily saying this, with the sentiments of laughter. but we are saying this with the sentiments of really saying the ANC is demising in KwaZulu-Natal, and I think over probably IFP is going there, and who then is rising is a question we must ask. Clearly, for me, is the DA. And that's the question that is facing the voter for the local government elections in 2026 and perhaps the next elections in 2029. But for me, it's a signaling of what we have been talking about, that the ANC is kicking with the last energy and the last power in Ubaba Umsholozi. And that is what we have now clearly witnessed happening with the rising of IFP. The ANC is gone.
So what does it mean then for the PEC, for example, that is the Provincial Executive Committee of the ANC in that province that is led by Siboniso Duma and, of course, the Provincial Secretary, Ntuli?
What it means, Bongiwe, in politics, there is never a lost moment. What it means is that perhaps it is time for the ANC to regroup itself and remobilize itself. The fact that it is not in government, it does not necessarily mean that it is not in its own politics. But what the voter is saying to the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, go back and cleanse yourself, for lack of a better word, read the political moment. And I think perhaps by sitting in the opposition benches, something there may happen for the ANC in the next 5 years to say, correct yourself, we are likely to probably come back and vote for you. So it's not necessarily gloom and doom. I think the politics of any nation in any country happen like that. Politics is a game of win and lose, and this time around it just didn't work in the favor of the ANC. But I think the ANC mustn't take it with their backs lying down. Basically, must take it as a lesson that says, if you really disrespect the voter has the power. Democracy lies in the strength of the vote. Mm-hmm. And I think if they take it positively in that light and just go back to the eye of the needle and reorganize itself and organize the branches of the ANC, have conversations with the most key politicians in the province, including, by the way, Umkhonto weSizwe. Sort that business between Umkhonto weSizwe and the ANC. I think that's an opportunity that is arriving at their doorstep, and I don't think that it should be taken in a negative light. I think it's a positive thing in terms of growth.
You touch on the policy of through the eye of the needle. Some have argued that this cohort, this executive of the African National Congress in KwaZulu-Natal was perhaps not fit for purpose, at least those at the helm, be it Siboniso Duma as well as Ntuli in this instance. Because when you say they go back to the drawing board, they go and organize at branch level and cleanse themselves. But they were a fairly new structure. If there were ever any problems around governance, you can't apportion a lot of blame to the new structure. They had just come in. So is it not just a leadership issue here with them?
Of course it is. I think if we remember how the elections happened in the province and the rising of the collective of that we know as the PS, the outgoing PEC, if they are still there, and bringing in it was trying to mitigate those issues, and the fact that they did not vote for Sihle Zikalala again. It was clear that the current chairperson of the province, for instance, was not ready to govern a new politician in the space. So those things were picked up, and perhaps what we are seeing now is just a manifestation of the fact that there were those challenges. And I mean, bringing Ntuli, I think Ntuli was coming from another district as well. And so KwaZulu-Natal is very delicate, is very complex. It requires a high level of leadership that is quite unique in all the other 8 provinces that we have in the country. And I think the ANC, perhaps in this particular instance, was robbed of that. And we must remember, Bongiwe, that it happened at the time also when KwaZulu-Natal was experiencing problems that were necessarily coming from national level. It was at the time of the former Minister of Health, resigning and leaving the time of step aside. A whole range of things were happening. Sihle Zikalala taking a water tank into his house. So many things, right? So it was happening even at that time that was highly volatile. And I think coming into leadership, and then you have to prepare for election of this nature. And with those kinds of glitches and level of lack of skill or inadequate skill, perhaps the skill was there, but lack of preparation just in terms of what does it mean to lead a political organization like the ANC, particularly in the province, the dynamic, the Zuma factor was also in the political domain. They spent a lot of time visiting Nkandla, for instance, trying to find some advice or maybe their own way of gaining back the confidence of Babumsholos and so on. And that showed that there's some level of political leadership there that was dicey, and of course it was not able to hold the center in KwaZulu-Natal as we see in these elections. And why is Nomusa not back? So it's those things.
It's quite an interesting one, especially when you talk about the makeup of the province of KwaZulu-Natal. Circling back to the IFP, you speak about a factor. There's also that Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi factor. And today, you're seeing his son, Inkosi, of the Buthelezi clan, for example, Prince Zuzifa, in parliament there as well. And then you see a province like KwaZulu-Natal also now being led again by the IFP. Let's talk about that dynamic that is also now at play in that particular province.
Bongwe and Fundo, the relationship of Inkatha Freedom Party and the royal family is what comes up when you ask that question. There's been a lot of questions around, for instance, how the prince, the late, had a relationship with the king, the late may his soul rest in peace, and that then moving over into the current leadership of Ingonyama, right, and then the appointment of Buthelezi in his particular, in terms of being now the prime minister, and people asking questions to say, is Inkatha Freedom Party, for instance, now that we're entering these elections and moving forward, going to reorganize itself in a way that there's a clear line and a distinction between itself as a political party that is servicing the needs of the people and its relationship with the kingdom? And I think that my response to that question is that I think those questions are still facing Inkatha Freedom Party, whether they are able to really make that divorce possible or not. Mm-hmm. The contestations that are there at Kosini right now, that are still unresolved, by the way, are something that are telling also to that effect. So I see the appointment of the premier within the Inkatha Freedom Party taking us back into that politic, into that dynamic, to say then, how do we resolve? Remember, in the manifesto of Umkhonto weSizwe and in the manifesto of Inkatha Freedom Party, they have very particular objectives around reorganizing the role of traditional leadership for South Africa, but also in the province. But in this pact that they've now entered into, which is now the provincial government of unity, which emanates from this national government of unity, this intent that they've just released speaks about reviewing, and I questioned that word, Bongwe and Fundo, reviewing the role of the traditional leadership in the politics of South Africa. And this reviewing must not be taken light, because the DA particularly has a certain position around what it understands to be the role of traditional leadership. Mm-hmm. Recently, when Utogo Didiza, the Honorable Minister, who is now the Speaker, she was leading the Ministry of Land Affairs. In those conversations between Ubkosi and the department, they were demanding that Ubkosi needs to answer, and be compliant to the department. When Ingonyama was saying, but I am Ingonyama here, I am the king KwaZulu-Natal, why should I report to you and answer to you as a government? Basically raising the politics of difference between democratic arrangements and the arrangements of royalty, mm-hmm. or what we call royal kingdoms, and it's a long debate which takes us to the British involvement and how we are mimicking the British monarchy in our systems of governance in the country. But to cut it short for now, what it then means is that we are faced with those questions. Is the IFP going to be able to defend traditional leadership in KwaZulu-Natal as a province under this premier? Because those are issues that are sentimental to the citizens of KwaZulu-Natal. Or is the IFP going to then support the ANC under this GNU pact to move the powers of the kingdom into the hands of government, and of course perhaps leading to its demise in KwaZulu-Natal, which is something that will make the people of KwaZulu-Natal very unhappy, deeply unhappy, because Inkatha Freedom Party is known for fighting for the survival of probably the only prominent kingdom in South Africa. It's not the only kingdom, we've got many others, Abomjaji and so on, but this particular one was key in the negotiations in Kodesa, This particular one was key in the transition in 1993 and 1994. This particular one was key and remains key in the arrangements of what you know as Ngonyama Trust, the king being the trustee, the question of access to land for the people of KwaZulu, economic livelihoods of the people of KwaZulu that emanate from the land use. So how the Premier is going to deal with those questions in the GNU? Will the Premier compromise and speak the language of the ANC and the DA? Do they have the strength to not to? And stick up to the language that perhaps will be understood by the MK. You know, so those are the lost opportunities and intricate matters that they will need to answer to be at least to the population of the province in order for the Premier to survive the 5 years.
It will honestly be quite interesting to see how Thami Ntuli navigates these waters, because we do know that those tensions between the royal house and the government came to a head probably 3 or 4 days before elections, when we saw the king calling that emergency meeting to speak to some of the traditional leaders around the issues of curtailing their powers. So we know that the relationship for now is quite frosty.
Totally. And I mean, you saw the king is working hard also as we are doing this election. The king has gone to the Chamber Church. He is now wearing that gown, right, of ordination, which means basically shows us that he is actually in making those relationships intact before the politicians come to say you can't touch, if you touch the Chamber Church, you're going to be touching, of course. And it's tense. It's really, really tense. I think the Honorable Premier Ntuli incoming has a lot of work to do in his hands into a province that is already highly volatile because of the rise of Umkhonto weSizwe.
All right, Dr. Vilakazi, thank you so much for your time this evening. That's our political analyst there, Dr. Fikile Vilakazi.